Good evening, and thank you for coming. I'm Ralph Hexter, Executive Dean and Dean of Arts and Humanities in the College of Letters and Science. It's a pleasure to welcome you tonight to this edition of The College Presents. This is a series of public lectures that we put on to really showcase the whole range of what we're engaged with at Berkeley in the College of Letters and Science, and to address issues that are vital and relevant to the entire community. I'm delighted that we have tonight with us Oliver Stone. For those of you who, as I have seen his recent movie, Alexander, you know what a compelling storyteller he is. And you're aware of the epic scale on which Oliver has created that film, as well as so many of his earlier movies. Filmmakers, in particular Oliver, are really skilled at transporting us into other worlds, the worlds of the imagination, and they allow us to glimpse cultures that we really have only dreamt of before. Oliver in particular has put himself in the role of grappling with serious historical issues and legendary characters. I think of JFK, Nixon, and of course Alexander. If we add some of his screenwriting credits, Evita and Conan the Barbarian, we see the mythic proportions of the characters even more clearly. Now, I was talking to Oliver before this event and talking about some of his experiences. I mean, he's been very, very clear that some of his personal experiences, particularly in Vietnam, have really shaped his view of the world and also, of course, of the films that he wants to bring us. As few filmmakers have, he really asks us to grapple with the issues of the society, and himself as a filmmaker, he's made film history. As you know, there are many of his fans here. He's been nominated for 11 Academy Awards, winning 3 times, twice for directing, Born on the 4th of July, and Platoon, and once for writing, Midnight Express. He's also received multiple Golden Globe Awards. He's a film producer, essayist, and novelist. Thank you, Oliver, for visiting us tonight, the 3rd visit to Berkeley, and talking with us about Alexander and classic filmmaking. Oliver Stone. Oliver.
Thank you very much. This is a rich subject tonight. This is, I think, one of the most original, perhaps the most unique individual history that I have run across. Very few men or women have lived a life like this. And it's a great story, and I have always wondered, why hasn't it been done more? That was one of the first. I saw the 1956 or 5 film with Richard Burton, written and directed by a very fine writer-director, Robert Rossen. And in that movie, those of you who might have seen it on DVD, Richard Burton, they expend so much of the energy in the movie in the fertile Greek opening, which is rife with conspiracy and with marriage and politics, and how Alexander achieves the throne over the dead body of his father, that by the time you're exhausted, by the time he finishes with Persia in Act 2, which is essentially the close of the movie, and they don't go beyond Persia, which leaves out the last 7 years of his life, which are fascinating and crucial to understanding him. That is to say, Afghanistan, India, and the return to Babylon. 7 crucial years. Because they're not the easy side, they're not the victorious and simpler side of the rise of the man. It's the fall of the man. We could talk later. I'm going to suggest topics of conversation about, the Hollywood biographies. Why does a Muhammad Ali biography stop when the man is at a certain age of his life, rather than when he's a partly broken Parkinson's victim? Or why the Aviator stops at a certain point? These are issues. But by ending the film in Persia, you get the satisfaction of a revenge drama, with Alexander, of course, revenging the murder of his father, supposedly done by Darius, by beating the king and fulfilling his father's dream. But it becomes rather a conventional revenge drama, and that I don't think does justice to the complexity of Alexander's life. In the script that we undertook in 1989, 1995, 2000, there were many drafts. We sought, and particularly I sought, to find a way to tell all the man's life. Now, this is very ambitious. For me, I knew it was the highest ambition of all. It's a 5-act play, Shakespearean. It's in the Greek dramas, it could be 5 acts. They could be very long. American, or let's say modern attention spans have come down to about, at most, 2.5 hours, I'm told. And you have to deal with that. You cannot do a 5-act play unless... So I was asking some friends of mine, have you ever heard of a good 4-act play? And there are a few. I think some O'Neill plays are 4-act. But it was a tremendous struggle for me in those 3 full years that we made the film to somehow squeeze these 4 acts I knew was not going to work on film, to squeeze these 4 acts into 3. And it was what I wrestled with, because my writing on the film continued all the way through the editing. The idea, I thought, to solve it, and I think it is the correct idea, is to go with a parallel story of Alexander as a young man in Greece, where his formation of his character and the subsoil, the main subsoil of this movie is. But don't overdo Greece in the beginning. Take the mother and the father, the true unfolding of that story of him as an older adolescent, and put that into the 3rd act, and do parallel scenes with what happens in the 3rd act of his life, looking for the ironic echoes that occurred throughout his life, because everything that he did when young was to some degree repeated when old. He acted out his mother and his father's fantasies and their wishes, as children often do. And all the seeds that were laid for him to be great, all the tensions that were given to him that made him torn, came to bear full fruit in the 3rd act. And that was the intention, and that was the script. I think sometime, somewhere during the hurried 7-month edit of this film, and I say hurried because it is a huge film with a lot of special effects shots, and it could easily be done in a year, 10 months to a year. But in that hurried period, compromises and pressures, as in every film, are made. And I moved things around because I was worried that I was not being clear enough with this parallel story. So if you saw the movie, you see the intrigue begin to develop in Act 1. The intrigue over the throne with the mother and Colin Farrell, and the father and Colin Farrell. And I think I made a mistake. I think we should have left the boy in the cave when he was young and never see Colin Farrell, and you go right to the Battle of Gaugamela. And you leave it as a mystery. And then only you go back to these wonderful actors, Angelina Jolie and Val Kilmer, and you deliver the payoff of what really happened. Because the central thesis of the movie was intended to be Alexander's feelings about the murder of his father. As in any Greek tragedy, especially the Orestes trilogy, I don't know if they call it that, but the murder of patricide, the charge of patricide is a serious disgrace. Should Alexander have killed his mother? Should he have suspected his mother? Should he have put her on trial? These are issues he had to face as a king. And he could not face them, I say, because he had to leave Greece, and he never saw her again, and he stayed away for 11 years. And that is something they don't bring up in the history books, but it does raise a very profound philosophic, psychological implication. Why did he avoid his mother? Why did he marry a Bactrian princess of no political significance 10 years after a Greek man is supposed to marry to have an heir to be king? And what was his relationship finally to his father's death? These are three dramatic questions that I addressed and wrestled with through the whole shooting. I'm going to release this version in DVD in July. And I think, frankly, I speak from my feelings tonight. I think the puzzle was solved and is now solved on film. The puzzle of how to do Alexander's life in less than 2.5 or 2 hours and 40 minutes. And I say this as humbly as I think some scientists might talk about working on a puzzle that has intrigued them for so many years. I've been over and over this story over again, and I've tried so many different variations. I tried a linear approach, as Rawson did, and it didn't work. And I've tried variations on a parallel approach. But this is my happiest I've ever been, and we called it the final cut. So that'll come out in 10 months. That's 10 months of editing, and it will be released shortly after the film was released. And that shows you that there's another medium. It's called video, DVD. And I don't know why. It seems to me the rules are changing. Composers, playwrights, rewrite, redo, restructure. So we can talk about that if you'd like. And then we can talk about the world reactions to Alexander. Because in the United States we did very poorly. The understanding of Alexander was limited. There was issues of, frankly, sexuality, because there is a certain immaturity about true discussions of homosexuality, and I found out, much to my grief, that you never mix bisexuality with military affairs ever again. I can't imagine General Schwarzkopf would have appreciated this film. On the other hand, the reactions were horrible in the UK. Horrible. It was worse in America and crueler, and in Australia. So those are the English-speaking countries, aren't they? And yet, it's so bizarre, isn't it? Because we did enormous business in all non-English-speaking countries. And you may not know it because it wasn't well reported here, because they called us a disaster, but the film recouped $130 million up to date in foreign countries. So the film will work its way back from this disastrous American beginning to get itself back in the black with the DVDs and the cables and stuff. So all the stories you hear about it being a turkey and a disaster, it's just media hype and horror show gossip, that they love. They love destruction. But the reactions to Alexander were enormous in Turkey, Spain, Russia, Poland, Hungary. You could call them cavalry countries, maybe. The Mediterranean countries, and above all, in Korea. In Korea, it was amazing. And the Far East was pretty good. Taiwan, Hong Kong. It held up. It held up far better. In fact, the truth of the matter is, after all is said and done and all the publicity, our film will gross more foreign than the 5 Academy Award nominees will gross. All 5. So it shows that there is a definite cultural deficit or gap between America, the English-speaking countries, and the rest of the world. We could talk in the same vein about the reactions to Alexander's, the growth of his story, and how that was misinterpreted and almost destroyed by, guess who? The Greeks. The Greeks did more damage to Alexander's reputation than anybody. And it was the Romans, the Persians, the Indians, even the Afghani, and the Egyptians, who made Alexander much of the legend that he became. So, again, you see Alexander at his birth, at his death, was controversial to begin with. And when he died, they fought over his body, like they did Kennedy's body. And it soon disappeared, as we know. But Alexander was never a Churchill or a de Gaulle. I mean, it was hard for him, even him, but they called him the Great in many different countries. So I'm glad that the truth in some way won out over the official line, which was the Greek line, which was that he was a monster. And I noticed when the film came out in America, Americans behaved very much like the Greeks, calling him a monster. But they were seeing this film through the 21st century eyes, and I think that is a subject, if you'd like, that is well worth discussing tonight. Doing a film through 21st century eyes, or trying to do it through the period in which the film took place. It's a big issue. Certainly Robin Lane Fox at Oxford was my historian, my main historian, was in his book written about Alexander in 1973, he went out of his way to separate the tabloid Alexander, many of whose stories are still believed, from the real Alexander that we know. A very valuable book to me. We could talk about accents if you want. We could talk about hair. I don't care. We can talk about anything. I mean, if you think about Spartacus, I was thinking this. I was looking at that the other night because now they love it. But you know, at the time there was all the slaves spoke Jewish New York, and or American actually. They spoke American, and all the upper class estate was represented by haughty English accents. And I think lastly we could talk, if you would like, about my feelings, my true feelings about Alexander. I don't want to, you know, hit you over the head with my feelings about him, but they certainly motivated the movie and have motivated me to continue to work on it after this release. It is the most important project of my life, and well worth. It was a privilege to do it. It was a privilege to do it for 3 years, and no matter the present result, I would do it again. Do it maybe differently, but I would do it again. I learned a lot from Alexander. So now we should turn it up.
Well, why don't we start with Alexander? Maybe not hair, but you know, clearly what you're telling us, this is a figure, a life that you've been thinking about for a very long time. How did you first come to Alexander, and why did he become such a passion for you that you wanted to?
Well, I didn't know him well, but it was always the children's books, the youth, the idealism, the beauty, the physical beauty. Mm-hmm. The fact that he died young, because when you're in your, you know, Jim Morrison for the same reason, mm-hmm. John Kennedy. And that's important. The fact that a young man or woman dying young, it goes to your heart. And then Mary Renault, of course, wrote very interesting psychological insights in her novels about it. I read Harold Lamb, mm-hmm. wrote an interesting book about Alexander. I think it was 1947. Very interesting. And Benoit Machiste in France, Ulrich Wilken in Germany, William Tarn in England. And of course you have to read the naysayers, the people like Peter Green and Ernst Badian. And there are others, but I mean, we don't just ignore it. And we talk. I'd be willing to talk about the slaughters or whatever you'd like.
Well, when actually did the idea of making a film about Alexander emerge for you, or was that something that was really a project that you've had in the back of your mind for years?
No, it was a dream, a fantasy. I don't think it was ever going to happen because we didn't have digital back in those days. You see, so it would have been a very limited film. But certainly the idea was broached. Other people developed it too. Spielberg was working on something. Lucas was working on something. I'd heard rumors. And Alexander was always, there. And in 1979, a German producer called Tom Schuley came to me, and he'd done Baron Munchausen, which mm-hmm. is another fantasy film about, a guy who believes in anything. So he loved that idea, and he sold me on it. But he couldn't raise the money. It took 10 more years, and we developed it. And I got older. The older you get, now I'm more like Ptolemy in the movie, looking back at the young man. And I see the positive and the negative. I see where idealism can drive people crazy,
Well, I want to ask you about Ptolemy, because that was that's such a structuring feature of the film, that you have him coming in and narrating and reflecting on, and it certainly, for me, framed it the political significance of Alexander's career and the way it reshaped the whole Mediterranean world. When, in your process of developing the story you actually filmed, did Ptolemy and that narrative structure enter into your thinking?
Well, you've hit a very sore point, and I think it's a good question, because many people criticized it as too much history. And I understand the American point of view, and I can make the film simpler, and I have. So we cut a lot of the descriptions of history because, frankly, they can go read it. And I'm okay with that. I don't mind a simpler approach. The movie won't make money if only classicists see it, you see. But,
no?
But in other words, I went back and I examined it. But you see, Ptolemy is a very important character. And
well,
the studio said to me at one point, cut him out of the movie, you know, and make it in first-person point of view voiceover. What a disaster.
But you understand, I'm not...
I'm telling you this story from the swimming pool where I'm lying.
Yeah. I'm not asking it from that question, because I am, for my sins, a classicist.
No, I'm not putting you... I'm sorry. I want to go further, though. I want to say that...
In a sense, what was your dream with that?
It's a crucial role because it's not conventional. They missed the point. In the first scene, he says everything that's positive about Alexander in the most beautiful way, which is normally what is said in the end of the movie, at the epilogue. This is done in the prologue, which is different, because the prologue, he praises Alexander. And then, as the movie develops, you begin to sense the disassociation. By the end of the movie, in the epilogue, what is the first thing he says? The truth is never simple. Pause, we did kill him. By silence. We consented. By silence alone, we consented. Mm-hmm. And then he goes on to say, the dreamers must die. They exhaust us in the end. Why? Because Alexander, these guys were all millionaires. Every general around him was a millionaire. These guys wanted to be mini kings. They wanted to go back to Macedonia, rule their provinces, and be kings. They were ready. They were in their 30s. Ptolemy was 44. The motive was there. In fact, Ptolemy wanted Egypt, because Egypt was apparently the richest and the easiest to rule. So, and also at that time, because Philotas had been executed because he was the chief of the royal security, you know who the chief of the royal security was Ptolemy, mm-hmm. which leads us to believe, many people to believe, that Ptolemy was in on it with Cassander and Antipater, and maybe others. Those two, that two families, though, makes the biggest, they make the most sense. And in the movie, there's a very subtle look when Alexander drinks the wine. I don't know if you noticed, with the bear skin on his head. Yeah. And he looks right at Ptolemy. And Ptolemy's like a little bit nervous, you know. Here is his buddy, Ptolemy, his buddy, through the movie. Lets him down. Those 10 days before he was, you know, you can go, those 10 days before he died, very strange days. The parties, the resumption of the drinking of the wine after he'd been sick, the second poisoning, I would call it. Mm-hmm. The way Cassander, the way it was done, I don't know, it just, listen, people will say he wasn't killed, he died of a weakened condition. That's what I said is the official story. But I cannot believe that these generals would go on with Alexander. He was leaving for Arabia, I think, in 5 days. Leaving for Arabia. You know what that means? It's another year out there. Then he wants to go to Carthage and Sicily and Rome, and he wants to fight his way through Spain and out the gates of Heracles. When are you going to go home and spend your dough? These guys, I mean, they went a long way with him, 11 years, mobile empire. But the Asians were encroaching on them. The army was mostly Asian. They were getting the posts. The wealth was being divided. What better time to strike than now, before he started on his new trip? Hephaestion, who was best security and his best friend, was dead. Also under very mysterious circumstances. Because there was the second time where Hephaestion ate the chicken, the cold chicken, and drank the wine. Which was, it was very strange. It just, everything seems to repeat itself. And if you remember the story, Alexander tells Hephaestion, I will follow you down to the house of the death, echoing Achilles and Patroclus. And he did. I do believe that Alexander, whether he was poisoned or not, died somewhere of a broken heart. He dreamed of going to Arabia, but without Hephaestion, his soulmate, it was not conceivable. His end was clear. But the timing, the motive, and I go back to JFK, cui bono, who benefits? Don't get distracted by all the scenery. Who benefits? All the generals benefited. They may have got engaged in civil wars, and most of them were murdered. But Cassandra came out ahead, and Ptolemy came out ahead. Those were the two most successful.
When I think of Alexander, not only the historical figure that we know from various historical accounts, and you were working closely with Robin Lane Fox on the movie, but then all of the myths, as you say, that really go back to the very age he lived in. It's almost as if there's too much story, too many possibilities. It was interesting to hear your account of still shaping it and trying to trying to make major narrative decisions as you were working on the film. Is that normally been the way you've been able to work with material, or was Alexander?
This was so exciting because I was dealing with huge stuff. I mean, when you're editing a movie in 7 months and you have to spend so much time showing it to people, and of course it's not ready, and you're getting criticisms, and it's a big release, and it's so much of a gigantic pressure point. You try to make people happy, and you can't. It requires ruthlessness. I don't know if I'm capable of that ruthlessness. I wish I had more time. But I only blame myself because it's my job to communicate. And I think I got carried away with the homosexuality because I wanted to reinforce the relationship. But I think the relationship is clear with less emphasis. I really do. And I'll show you in the DVD, I hope. But the most important thing is truly to understand that if you allow your imagination to roam, if he gets to Babylon and he gets to Babylon after Gargamela, and he works his way through the Northeast, meets Roxanne, marries her, has the relationship. And then after he's married her and after he's had the relationship, you've had the mother writing letters. Now you bring the mother in full blast, parallel, because she's telling him how to get the throne and how to be smart and how to marry. And he does everything wrong, everything that opposite than what his mother says. So at that point, the movie reaches another level. So you're beginning to see the young Alexander side by side with the older Alexander. He's in the mutiny at the same time as he's perhaps involved with the murder of his father. He's killing Clitus. And you see the young Alexander at the feast when his father banishes him. And all these things. And then the greatest moment of all, which I think I blew, which is in the DVD, is when he is so mortally wounded in India. At his greatest moment, what's the last thing he thinks about? It was always in the script. I didn't do it. It's when he rises through the trees, he sees the last scene of himself and his mother, which is a powerful scene, where the mother doesn't deny or doesn't accept the guilt, but says it doesn't matter. Take it. Take the power of the world. It's yours. You are like me. You have the same drive for the will to power. And Alexander knows he does. When he walks out of that room, it's a highlight for me. He never saw his mother again because he recognizes right then and there how much like his mother he really is. And that's something most men deny. And that's what I love about Alexander, because he's masculine feminine. Most action heroes, let's forget, we all love Russell Crowe and we all love Brad Pitt, but they're all masculine. And Alexander is his blend of his mother and his father. And I think Colin had the guts to go to the feminine. And you don't see that in movies, I don't think since Peter O'Toole and Lawrence of Arabia. And God damn it, I hope the kids can see that a man can be also feminine. It doesn't have to always be so straight and simple.
This conversation is going in so many surprising directions for me. I have a feeling, actually, clearly you're still working on this film.
I finished. No, now it's into the technological finish, where they're distributing it. No, July 5th.
You mean you're telling me that you're not going to start thinking about again?
I said this once, and I still believe it. We shot a mountain of material. It is a tall mountain. We did a 7-month cut. the North Face approach. It was fast as we could. We got to the top. Not everybody came with us and made it out alive, okay? I got the 10-month cut. That's a south slope. We took a little bit more sun, more people made it out, are going to make it out. And who knows, 5, 10 years, if people are interested and I'm interested, there might be an east approach or a west approach.
I see. Well, that's one image. I was actually, I hope you'll like this, I was actually thinking you want to be Homer so that you can keep singing the Iliad again and again, slightly different for different audiences.
Exactly. Very well said. I didn't think about that. Homer changes the story the whole time.
And then,
so does the Bible, for that matter.
Well, and we were talking about this before. Do you think there's a special relationship with the Iliad and Homer in the Alexander story?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you know, Alexander's greatest hero is Achilles, and he references him on the cave walls, as he does the 4 other myths, and you should talk about that separately, because it's very important to understand that Alexander believes those stories on the walls the way you and I believe the myths of Babe Ruth or Abe Lincoln or George Washington. You know, these are things. He was related to Achilles. His mother told him. How are we not to know that I'm related to Achilles? I could be related to George Washington if my mother told me. His mother is totally out there. She's telling him, you are going to be famous in 2,300 centuries. You're going to be famous now. You will live forever. I mean, we all know the mom who says, you're going to be a great man, Sonny. This is a mother who's saying, you're going to exist for 20 centuries. This woman has vision and ambition. But she did it. She put this idea in this boy's head. And I think she put it in his head strongly. And I think at the same time she also put the idea of Achilles, because he was a relative. You will die young, my son, but you will achieve great glory. Or you can live forever, live long, and you will be like Ptolemy in the end. I think his mother drove the bargain. Mothers can drive children. And father, don't underestimate the father. The beauty of Alexander is he had 2 strong parents, and Val Kilmer doesn't give an inch. He is a noble father, and a tough father. And contrary to what some people, detractors, said, there is a true love between the 2 of them. Which is why Alexander is so torn when his father is assassinated. He worries, he fears, assassinated by his mother's money. The assassination is a classic JFK story, as you know. There were so many enemies against Philip, from the Greeks, the Persians, Olympias, and the lover, the sexual lover, that to this day it remains one of the great mysteries.
Well, you know, and in the Iliad, it's Achilles' relationship with his mother. I mean, you don't really see his relationship with his father, but his mother is the recurrent figure.
You don't see the relationship with the father.
No. But, you know, you talked a little bit about...
Do they know that Achilles was found by, was it Odysseus, in woman's clothes, hiding? When he first...
An early
tell them about that, because it has a lot to do with woman's clothes, Achilles. It has a lot to do with this, the male-female myth.
Achilles was, going to be fated to die there, so tried to disguise. He was tried to disguise as a girl, and Odysseus found him out by throwing a ball at him, which he caught as a young man would, and so his disguise was blown. In any event, that's a pretty minor story that
Achilles was trying to avoid the war because he knew he'd die.
That's the reverse side, and every myth always comes in the ancient world with a reverse version. Of course, there's the one who chooses the early death and the glory, but it has its reverse side, its comic version. But you alluded to the fact that during this period of the editing, there were so many audiences. What is it like to work in the industry today? I mean, how do you bring a story like that to the screen?
You don't. This was a freak event. I had a wonderful partner, a German partner, who raised his money really internationally, Moritz Bormann of Intermedia. And he did this by hook and crook, and he was, I think, like Sam Spiegel back in the old days. I mean, literally, he was on the bankruptcy line any moment. And we basically got our U.S. distribution deal, which was a key to the whole thing. That is to say, about 25% of the total budget, on the basis that we basically sold ourselves to them as the son of Achilles. I said, you know, you're making the popcorn picture. It's going to make a fortune with Brad Pitt. But just imagine if you had a follow-up picture with the guy who loved Achilles the most. I mean, at work, even if you make a half of what the original makes, you're going to make money. You know, it wasn't any particular interest in Alexander. Alexander to them is fiction. They don't. In fact, a lot of the critics, unfortunately, don't know that he's real. I mean, I did get a lot of criticism for it not being Gladiator. Don't you think I wish I could have killed him in India? Don't you think I wish he could have killed Darius at the Battle of Gaugamela and married Satira? Oh, it would have been nice for the movie purposes. It would have been 2 hours and 20 minutes.
So should I ask, what do you think of Troy?
I enjoyed it, but I didn't for 1 second see it as Homer's movie. I saw parts of it, and I thought it was very clever, by the way. The script is very clever. Mm-hmm. I disagree with the critics. It was written by a guy named Benioff. Very good. But the central idea of Achilles becoming in love with this woman, Briseis, and changing his nature of his personality, finding compassion in war, is a brilliant 21st century idea. But it's not what happened.
Well, of course.
It's about the wrath of Achilles.
Yeah.
The wrath.
Well, that's Homer's version, but you were dealing with history and not even a traditional narrative.
Well, they had the right to change it.
Yeah.
They had the right to change it.
Yeah. That was actually
I did
my
not
take.
have the right to change Alexander, because that is history. Homer we don't know. As you said, they changed it all the time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, myself, I expected, coming with the prejudice of a classicist, to not like Troy, but I actually did like it because I think they made very smart narrative choices, the way Homer himself did when he was facing an audience. But you had really a much tougher road to hoe.
It's a different road. But we sold ourselves as the son of Achilles. So, of course, our advertising campaign did go weird because, you know, the company is selling Gladiator and what you call the other one, Braveheart, which is a typically strong picture. William Wallace, but, you know, William Wallace romanticized, you know. Mm-hmm. So that, you know, when audiences come in, and these are my son is 19 at Princeton, and he saw it with a bunch of friends, and, you know, the guys, when the moment they hug, the moment these guys kind of look at each other like that, wow, you know, man, I'm just not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with that.
Well,
I had no idea, because I was out of the country for 3 years practically, that homophobia had reached these levels in this country, of really strong levels. Nothing compared to the rest of the world, except possibly England and Australia. And Australia. And New Zealand, let's throw them in too. But in Korea, for example, which is a taboo, I was called by the Korean distributor 3 weeks before we opened. He said, Mr. Stone, he had a lot of money in the movie. He really helped us a lot, and I really felt sorry for him. We have a big problem in Korea. Taboo. So I said, look, I'll do this. I did some fast stuff for him. I said, go ahead and do it for Korea. We'll take a shot. And he came back to me at the end. He said, we've wrestled, and at the end, we went with your version. And you know what? Korea did like $10 million, which is enormous. So sometimes you do break taboos. I was hoping to break a taboo here, but I didn't figure on the emotionalism of that gay marriage issue of November 2004. I mean, that was a big issue, much more, and I felt it all throughout, all throughout the system, from left and right. From left and right. And I see more of it. I'm sorry, I'm coming back and I'm an outsider. I looked at Saturday Night Live. The jokes, they're much more homophobic than ever. And it's just like, you know, it's like there's a whole reaction to it. But they mistake the homophobia. They mistake what they call the homosexuality of Alexander with their own version, present day version of it. And it's not similar. And, you know, that's another discussion we can have if you'd like.
Well, on that point, I mean, watching that very carefully because it had become such an issue and that was in the press beforehand.
Alex the gay.
Yeah.
Well, Alex the geek.
I mean,
Alex the gay.
I guess there's sort of like two questions about that. I mean, you raised the question yourself about how do you get people with 2001 or 21st century eyes to see this. In a sense, this was a fact of his life don't you feel that you have an obligation to keep that as part of the story? How do you resist even that kind of homophobia? Or do you?
I didn't. I put it in.
Yeah.
But the facts are, we do not know that he had a man in Greece at the age of, when he entered the public arena, he became king at 19. You gave up your male lovers, or you had them quietly. You had a wife, you had a public position. A private person in Greece, correct me if I'm wrong, was called an idiota.
Idiote, yeah.
Yeah, idiotes. Because he only cared about private concern. The polis, the city-state, demanded public involvement. So you had the official front, and children, and that relationship. And often older men would mentor younger men, still, while married, and I think that Alexander probably gave up his relationship with Hephaestion, if he had one, which I think he did. By the time they were in the field, I don't think they were simply soulmates. They were lovers in the Platonic sense of the word, as Aristotle laid out in the movie earlier on. To love the other, to bring out the best in the other, not for any self-gain, which is a beautiful philosophical concept. That's what I got hooked on. Unfortunately, perhaps too much for the American audience, and maybe the world audience. I mean, I think I could be a little bit more subtle there. But it's an important point, and I just didn't want to lose it, because the Greeks were very outside the Roman philosophy. The Greeks were sensual. The Greeks worshipped the body in the most positive sense. As you know, their first Olympiads were naked. And they worshipped. They had oil on they had the best oils on their body. They ritualized, fetishized the body. And in Homer, you have a true appreciation of the body, because when you die, you go to the blackest pit in the world. You just die, and his deaths are gruesome. It's the end of the body, you know, the soma.
I thought that scene where Aristotle was speaking to Alexander and his friends about proper relationships, including relationships, same-sex relationship, was actually one of the most daring in the film, because that's where it became the most explicit. And I'm not sure we will ever know the degree, the way in which Alexander and Hephaestion carried on their life beyond their youth, but it seemed to me that, let me try this on you, the depiction of the wedding night with Roxanne was, how should I put it, rather wild. And it almost seemed to me to actually describe that Platonic or Aristotelian view that the proper relationships with one's fellow male peers was very ordered and calm, but that the relationship with a woman was for the begetting of children and was actually almost animalistic. Is that a...
Well, I don't have all the answers to that. I did read texts, and you probably know far more about it, that the Greeks did have a ritualized patterns with male. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've even read that many males believed that the sperm contained knowledge. And that's the way knowledge was transmitted between men. Whereas women, they did not understand ovulation. They did not have any concept of it. That was not discovered under the microscope until a Dutch biologist studying pregnant rabbits in 1630 in Leyden. So that's why Olympias is able to believe that Zeus impregnated her. She didn't know. It's it's quite, and in fact, there's a line in the new DVD version where the son says that half the women in Greece believe such a thing. It's social mobility. But honestly, a crack of thunder, her Dionysian rites, animals, you could be impregnated by a snake. She kept snakes in her bed, by the way, to keep Philip out. And it worked. Although I do believe they loved and hated each other at the same time. But your question, I'm sorry, I got off the case there.
Well, let me try something totally different. Also, a lot of people discuss the movie in terms of current politics. Was that on your mind at all? And by that I mean the war in Iraq, going to the Middle East. Was anything so direct on your mind as you were developing this film?
No, we started in 1989, and this is so ironic, of course, to be trailed by the American invasions. Of course, we did it all wrong. But certainly, you see, Alexander was a great conqueror, but he was an includer. The first thing he did was make a deal with the Persian army. He kept them as best he could. He took their best. Everywhere he went, he included. He made treaties. He paved the way with the least amount of bloodshed. When he was betrayed, which was the case occasionally, he took particular pains to go back and really deal with the betrayer and wipe him out. He was ruthless in that regard, and many people hated him for it. But that was the way he enforced the reality of his mobile empire, which was, he may have fought wars, but he promoted peace and prosperity. Because he was the only one for 11 years that kept this thing relatively without wars. He tracked down every tribe, every bandits. He went up into mountain fortresses in the northeast of Persia for 3 years, tracking down all kinds of wild men, you know, the present Afghani hillsmen. And he won every single one. You see, he could not lose. He could not lose a battle. That's why he fought for 10 months at Tyre, which requires enormous patience, 10 months for a young man. He didn't rush into the final battle with Gaugamela. He took his time. He was a very wily military man, and he knew that if he lost one thing, the pressures would start to mount. That's why in the battle in India, if you paid close attention, and I think it would be helped by the new DVD better because of what it means, in India, he cannot lose that battle. That's why he has to ride alone into the maw of death and is mortally wounded, as he was at the Battle of Multan. And as a result of his near sacrifice, his entire army came to life for a change and won that battle. So his record was intact. He never lost a battle. Napoleon would shed tears over that. And as you know, because he lost 2 key battles, but Julius Caesar, Marcus Aurelius paid him homage. In the highest, and Marcus Aurelius was a philosopher, and recognized that Alexander had an intellectual curiosity that was far beyond most conquerors. He was a conqueror and a generous in victory, giving lands back in India, in Persia, including the army. And at the end, of course, he's faced with the epic problem of creating a new army, what he called Alexander's army. He needed Asians to stack that army. He didn't have enough people from Macedonia. So basically his army, but when he went to India, was 85% Asian. So that's what people don't understand, the pressure that he was under to have a multicultural command. That's why he had to wear more and more Persian and Indian clothes. That's why he took the trouble with the proskynesis. The mutinies, of course, that's another. Well, you know, there's so much to discuss. I don't know what you want to talk about.
Do you think he believed that he was the son of a god, or was that just something he put on? I mean, how did this affect his character?
I don't know. I think it's a red herring. I did not do the scene at Siwa. It's a beautiful scene. It's a great movie scene. It certainly could be done, because I think it would make him into more of a Carlos Castaneda character. And I don't. Alexander was very orderly, very organized. He never took credit unless it was offered, and he never demanded it. The scene with Clitus is the closest he ever came to, in my mind, to losing it, and he did lose it. Mm-hmm. But certainly, any Greek could be semi-divine. Olympic runners, Hercules, Heracles would become semi-divine. A man could work his way. Gods were like men and women. They had the foibles of human beings, but they were ruthless in their power. So a man could strive to be a god and could achieve those proportions, but they all knew, Alexander knew he was mortal, he knew he was going to die, he didn't have any illusions that he would live forever. But I think it's a red herring, because the idea is that the soldiers loved him and respected him as they would a god. He meant so much to them. So I never, the issues of Alexander's egotism don't apply to his divinity, they apply to his vision. He lost contact. He was ahead of his time. He lost contact with his men because I believe he was trying to fuse Greek and barbarian, Greek and East, Occident and Orient. And it's a very ambitious thing, and he succeeded in the sense that no one gives him credit. He married Asian, he stayed in Asia. He's the only so-called imperialist, and he's not an imperialist, who did not go home. All the Greeks in history, Achilles, Jason, Theseus, Perseus, they go back. They take the fleece, the woman, the fame, the fortune, they go back to Greece. Not Alexander. He stayed in the East, and he became more and more Asian. He married 3 Asian women. He had 2 half-Asian children. He had a fabulously interesting Asian lover in the eunuch Bagoas, who must have taught him the mysteries of, I guess, the third gender. He didn't have much interest in going home. Why didn't he go home? He didn't want to see his mom, maybe. Babylon was a temporary center. But I really think he had a vision of a mobile universe, a mobile center with laws, peace, security, commerce, trade, inflation, currency with his name on it, with himself as king, and yet a benevolent ruler, a philosopher king. And I think the world that he saw developed as he went. I don't think that he had a master plan. I think William Tarn's a little idealistic, yes. I don't think he ever used those words.
Do you think he had a plan for a succession?
That is an issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a big issue. Why? Well, in my dramatization, he kills his son, in a sense. Like Heracles, if you remember in the cave, that's one of the myths, destroys his 3 children after the 12 labors. That always surprised, in Greek mythology, that always bothered me. How can you do that, you know? You could say, well, stress, right? A lot of Vietnam veterans, right? 12 labors, you come back, you get pissed off. But, no, he was driven mad by the gods that day. And then, of course, Alexander, when he turns, his marriage to Roxanne, for me, looking as a dramatist, is a disaster. He's 10 years too late. He's married an insignificant hill tribe princess who doesn't give him an heir for at least 3 years. There's nothing worse. It's embarrassing. And as a result, I imply that she had something to do perhaps with Hephaestion's death. That's a dramatic license, no question about it. Although I base it on the fact that after he died, after Alexander died, she didn't waste any time bumping off Statira. She poisoned her within 48 hours. That was Alexander's second wife. So she was not exactly a sentimental woman either. So, these people were tough. So I'm saying, by allowing the idea that Roxanne, in a sense, through her jealousy, her possessiveness, which was known, but not much is known about it, but that was known, Alexander would have been turned off to that, because Hephaestion was the Platonic ideal, Roxanne was the female possessive ideal. And that's why I perhaps overindulged, but the idea was when he went to bed with Roxanne, in the movie terms, it was his first time in bed with the other species. So that's why I wanted to show the relationships. It was less interesting if he'd been in bed with the male species, because we've seen that much better in Warhol movies and various Gus Van Sant movies. I mean, what am I going to do? It's not. It takes time to do too. But it wasn't my intention. I mean, I assumed that there'd been something, but I really didn't believe there was something that was ongoing in the battlefield. I really didn't.
Thank you, Oliver, so much for joining us tonight.